Good morning. Jenny and I are taking a few days away to celebrate our anniversary, so I'm recording this at home. Today is Palm Sunday, and I want to share some thoughts about, before I get to the scripture here, about how we go from Palm Sunday to Easter. Years ago, more years than I care to remember now, while I was in high school, I had to do an oral book report. Now, I got the book out of the library, but I procrastinated, and I procrastinated some more, and it came time to do the report, and I hadn't read the book. So I opened the book up, and I read the jacket inside the cover, and proceeded to give my book report based on what I read there. I got an A on that book report. And I did go back and read the book later on because the things that I read there about the book that I was talking about in my report intrigued me so much that I wanted to read the story. And I tell you this because many times we go from Palm Sunday to Easter. We go from the celebration of the triumphant return to Jerusalem, and we skip right on down the road to Easter morning, and we celebrate the resurrection. And there's a whole lot that happens in between that shouldn't be left out. And so I invite you to read the Passion of Christ, to see the things that he endured, the struggles that Christ went through on the way to the cross. The Gospels make it clear that Jesus had decided that he needed to go back to Jerusalem, and that he knew full well that his return to Jerusalem would result in his death. But he went. And the passage that we have this morning that Pastor Don's preaching on is one of those passages that if you skip from Palm Sunday to Easter morning, you skip right over this. But it really provides an outline and some detail as to what's going on in the intervening time. Let me read to you the passage that Pastor Don will be preaching on from Luke 19, starting with the 41st verse through the end of the chapter. As Jesus came to the city and observed it, he wept over it. He said, "If only you knew on this of all days the things that lead to peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. The time will come when your enemies will build fortifications around you, encircle you, and attack you from all sides." He's talking about Jerusalem here. "They will crush you completely, you and the people within you. They won't leave one stone on top of another within you, because you didn't recognize the time of your gracious visit from God." When Jesus entered the temple, he threw out those who were selling things there. He said to them, "It's written, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a hideout for crooks." Jesus was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests, the legal experts, and the foremost leaders among the people were seeking to kill him. However, they couldn't find a way to do it because all the people were enthralled with what they heard. Jesus has come back to Jerusalem. He's withdrawn to Bethany, which is on a neighboring summit. And in coming down from Bethany, coming down into the valley, and then he comes back up into Jerusalem. As he's coming down the hill, he can look across and he can see Jerusalem. And it's in this vision across that he speaks these words about the city of Jerusalem and the destruction that is going to come and did come in AD 70 at the hands of the Roman government when they had had enough of the sparring with the Jewish people. It's not the first time that Jerusalem was completely destroyed. The Babylonians did it earlier, and we talked about that last week. And so there are three things that are happening in this passage. The first is Jesus' lament over the city. and the destruction that is to come. And then he moves on to cleansing the temple, the money changers, the selling of animals. It's the only instance of violence that we have attributed to Christ. And the other accounts of this instance, he takes off the belt around his robe and uses that as a whip, slinging it around and forces the money changers and the merchants to flee from the temple area. What was taking place here is that there was a temple tax that every male had to pay, had to be exact. And it was decreed that it would be in shekels. Now, there was currency, 5 or 6 different types of currency, according to William Barclay, that were legal tender. But yet the temple, they wanted the shekel. And so you had to exchange your currency to get the shekel, and it had to be exact. And so the money changers were charging to provide the shekels that were used for the temple tax. There was also the animal sacrifice. They had to be without blemish. Annas, the high priest, had his fingers in all of this. And the booths were under his control, that these merchants had to pay him rent to get this space to set up shop there. And I think he probably got a piece of the profit somewhere along the line too for what was going on there. And the animals, like I said, had to be without blemish, and it was the Annas's men, the priests that served under him, who had to examine the animals and decide whether they were without blemish. And they would find fault with many things. And so the easiest, the most sure way that your sacrifice would be acceptable was to buy one of the approved animals. And there was a markup there. And the people who could least afford it were the ones that were being extorted to be able to make their sacrifice. And then the third thing that is taking place here is the teaching in the temple, that Jesus is teaching there every day. He goes to the temple and people gather around him, and he's teaching during that time. So the crowds were always around him. And while the temple, there was a temple police, temple guard, that did Annas's bidding, and while he wanted him arrested and actually wanted him killed, he couldn't do that because of all the people around him. And it was only after Judas comes and says, "I'll show you where he's at. I'll tell you when he's away from the people, so you can come and get him," and gets the 30 pieces of silver, which Judas immediately regrets that he made that deal with the priest. And so these are 3 of the things that the scripture records. We also know that the Last Supper, the Passover meal, was celebrated, and that Jesus went out into Gethsemane to pray. We talked about that last week. And that he was arrested there and taken before the high priest and tried. It was such a trumped up kangaroo court. Under the provisions of their law, 2 people had to agree on the testimony before it could be used against or to condemn a person. And they couldn't find 2 people to say the same thing. And so Jesus takes matters into his own hands and confesses, and so that they won't have to keep trying to find the witnesses. They find him guilty, but they don't have the power to put him to death, and they take him before Pilate, the Roman governor. And he is reluctant to pass sentence, But ultimately, he gives his approval to the Jews to take Jesus and have him crucified. But he tries to provide an out. They release somebody for the celebration, and he offers Jesus to be released, and they say, no, give us Barabbas instead, a thief, a rebel rouser. And so Jesus is condemned to the cross. He dies on the cross and is taken down and buried. All of these events take place during this week, and there's struggles that Christ goes through. There's praying that he does. There's teaching he does with his disciples. So if we skip from Palm Sunday all the way over to Easter morning without checking this out, without immersing ourselves, without, as Paul Harvey used to say, getting the rest of the story, then we do Christ a disservice. We do the sacrifice that he did for us a disservice. So I hope that you will spend some time with your scripture during this coming week, and that you will be there with us, with Pastor Dawn, later on this morning, this Palm Sunday morning, as we celebrate Jesus' triumphant return and entry into Jerusalem. May God's blessings be upon you.